Welcome back, everyone. If everyone is seated and ready, we can start our last session, last speech of the day. And now, I'm thrilled to present Melanie Rieback. Please put your hands together for Melanie Rieback. She is the co-founder and CEO at Nonprofit Ventures. Directly, so you don't have to.
Good afternoon. So I was just attempting to wrangle a cat for my presentation, but it didn't quite work out. It would be fitting here in Istanbul, and it would make my presentation so much better. So anyhow, but I am here today to talk about post-growth entrepreneurship. Post-growth. So first of all, who here is an entrepreneur? Raise your hand. Okay, maybe almost half. That's actually pretty impressive. All right, so I don't know about your experiences with entrepreneurship, but frequently when we want to start our company, we go to startup incubators. And I'm running not one, but actually two companies. I'm CEO and co-founder of both Radically Open Security. We're actually a 50-person cybersecurity company that does what's called ethical hacking. So my real day job actually is indeed, for example, universities hire me and my team in, and they will say, pretend you are students, change your grades. It's a lot of fun. And actually, speaking of cats, another thing too is I have the dubious distinction that I was the first person ever to write a computer virus for, those RFID tags, those little radio frequency chips. And I'd published actually at the time a paper that was called "Is Your Cat Infected with a Computer Virus?" It won a Best Paper award, and honestly, it exploded. I got 200 emails on the first day after that paper was published. And I think it was, I forget which an antivirus company had actually taken out a full-page ad debunking my research, which if you're a PhD student, that means you've made it. Anyway, but I've been in cybersecurity for 23 years now, so long time. So I started a social enterprise in the cybersecurity space, quite frankly, because I was appalled by the really bad behavior of some cybersecurity companies. They do things like work with intelligence agencies. They will hack activists, because Extinction Rebellion is so terrifying. And they will build surveillance systems and then sell them to countries with oppressive regimes, right? And then when the hacker community in the Netherlands called them on it and said, hey, dear company, could you please stop doing this? Did they stop? Well, no, not really. They just sold that part of the company. So at the same time, I also was myself at the time working in the cybercrime team at ING Bank. And we were busy having a bit of a cybersecurity problem. We had something called a denial of service attack. And our servers were offline. We were in the newspapers. There were political cartoons with ING's little orange lion getting bombarded by missiles. The sea levels are freaking out in the war room. And then the consultants parachute in and they're like, we're the experts, stand back. We will fix everything for you and then give you a really large, a report and a large bill, And I was like, okay, guys, great. But, if you are so elite, then I can probably learn a whole lot from you. So, would you mind if I have a look at what you're doing? And then they turned to me and they were like, cybersecurity is hard. And I was like, I used to be an assistant professor of computer science specialized in cybersecurity. Why don't you try me? You know, and then they threw away log files, and then eventually I just like physically stood next to them and looked over their shoulder because that was the one way they couldn't get rid of me. So, and sure enough, they were using the same open source tools as everyone else, but they didn't want you to know that because they wanted you to think that cybersecurity is black magic, right? And only they can do it, and this is why you need to like give them repeat business. Needless to say, I was not impressed. And I also asked around with other banks, with government agencies, and you know, I said, you know, are you happy with these super commercial cybersecurity companies? And then universally the answer came back that, well, no, we're not actually that happy, but what's the alternative? So, you know, at that point I kind of put two and two together. I was like, okay, well, you know, the hacker community is not that happy. The customer base is not that happy. I think there's a hole in the market. And that was basically when I started Radically Open Security. But I wanted to make it different, and I didn't know how. So I went to my friend Michiel Leenaars from the NLNet Foundation, and I said to him, like, I want to create a company that's social, a company that's different, but I'm not sure how. And he said, you know, Melanie, there's a really elegant construction from the Dutch church. So sometimes a church wants to do a commercial spinoff. It raises money somehow, and that money goes with a tax benefit back to the church again. Now, a famous example of this in the Netherlands is the Language Institute Regina Caeli, otherwise known as the Nuns of Vught. So the nuns started the Language Institute. The Language Institute is very high quality. In fact, our queen, Maxima, who was originally from Argentina, she learned her Dutch there. And then the profits go back to the nuns. That's how it works. So basically, and the interesting part about this is we said, okay, you know, we will then make our commercial spin-off a cybersecurity company, and we will make our quote-unquote church the NLNet Foundation. And NLNet is a internet-related charity that has funded open source projects, digital rights initiatives, and anything for an open internet for roughly 35 years. On top of that, I made the highly unconventional decision to sell my company for €1 to a foundation. Worst sale ever. And why would I do this? Well, I did this, quite frankly, because I wanted to make it so that the company didn't belong to just me, and I also wanted to ensure that the company would not be sold. In other words, I did not want my company to have an exit. So what I really wanted to do actually was create a quote-unquote not-for-profit company. I thought about it, and just the whole idea just gripped me and wouldn't let me go, and I just knew, like, I have to do this, otherwise I'm gonna regret this, like, forever. I did surprise a few people, of course, by taking these actions, and on top of that, well, people didn't really believe that it could work, right? I mean, you know, a foundation-owned company that's giving 90% of its profits to charity, 90. And mind you, if you would wonder how you can give 90% of your profits to charity and still survive as a company, don't get confused. I said 90% of my profits, not 90% of my revenue, which basically means that my customers pay me, you know, and I can also pay my subcontractors, but we also reinvest what we need in growth and stability of the company. And we've got plenty of overhead, things like project management, our finance team, business development, IT and infrastructure. I'm also like useless management overhead, right? You know, so you know, but at the end of the day though, it's a bit of a ballet with money, but it works. It is a little hair-raising at times because really, if you look at our cash flow, it starts like at the beginning of the year, kind of low, then it kind of grows. Then we get to the end of the book year, then we calculate our profits, then we get a bit past, you know, into Q1, and then our cash plummets. But you know, but then it works. The 10% cash flow buffer that we don't have to donate is actually sufficient to keep us afloat so we can make payroll at the end of every month. Now, so on top of that, well, we just had our 10-year anniversary with Radically Open Security. We have about 50 staff members in the company, so we're actually by now a medium-sized player on the Dutch cybersecurity market. We've got a couple million in revenue, and we also have donated, best thing yet, just above 1 million euros to the NLNet Foundation. And that's pretty great. NLNet has actually used this money to, together with the European Commission, create a program that's called Next Generation Internet, NGI. And for those of you who would be familiar with open source and with technology, NGI is actually, it has funded, I think, close to 1,000 open source projects, and it's actually the largest open source funding initiative, not just in Europe, but actually in the world. So, and I'm really happy that we've been able to allow NLNet to be able to create this program together with the EC. So that's all pretty cool. Of course, in the course of being an entrepreneur and running a company, of course, when I first started all this, I had no clue what I was doing. You know, because I didn't have a business degree, you know, I really was totally green. You know, and I went to that startup boot camp, you know, that I was telling you about at the beginning. And I can remember sitting there, you know, they flew in the woman from Silicon Valley, you know, to teach us. And the very first PowerPoint slide has the exponential curve on it. And then they say, do this. And then after that, they tell me that the exit is my definition of success. And if I want to be even more successful than that, then I do it multiple times. And if I want to be even more successful than that, then I become a VC. So that's kind of the formula. And then, of course, afterwards, then they told me, and by the way, you know, there's venture capitalists that we would like to introduce you to. Now, mind you, like, I was in the middle of this and looking at this, and I was like, this does not make any sense to me. After about 4 or 5 years of running a cybersecurity company and being a CEO, at a certain point I started realizing, wait a minute, no, this does make sense, but just not for me. So, you know, and I sort of started picking the system apart a bit and realizing that actually, you know, this whole exponential curve, right? You know, anything that grows exponentially, you're not going to be able to keep that up very long, right? Just mathematically speaking, at a certain point, you're growing so quickly it doesn't make sense anymore. So, you know, and it doesn't take a huge leap of the imagination to understand that the only purpose for this exponential curve is actually to get you to the exit in a discrete period of time, preferably 3 to 5 years. The other thing also is if you're building a business, particularly if you're building a social enterprise, then selling your company is not that helpful. Because, you know, why is it then that we want to, you know, just build a company for 3 to 5 years, then you dump the shares, then what happens with the company? I mean, there's always trauma that occurs with companies when they're acquired. I mean, frequently there's a culture clash between the acquirer and then the acquiree, you know, and it usually only takes a few years before the senior staff is just like, screw this, I'm leaving. You know, and on top of that, oftentimes, you know, I can't talk for every industry, but certainly in the cybersecurity industry, we are acquired because we are basically quote unquote attractive acqui-hires. Because it's really hard to find qualified cybersecurity staff because there's a talent shortage. So, you know, why struggle with hiring if you can just take over a company, right? And that's all well and good, but then the problem is that whatever product or service we happen to be working on when we got acqui-hired, well, oftentimes gets discarded by the company doing the acquiring. And this is pure value destruction. Right? And the only reason really why this happens is because the shareholders, you know, the owners of the company, they get to cash out at that moment when it's acquired, but it's not good for anybody else. It's not good for the employees. It's not good for society. It's not good for, So this is all a bit problematic. It's the same thing also with going public with your company, with initial public offerings. Because the problem is, we have started treating our startups like they are factory farm chickens. And what we do is, we take the startup and we force feed it investment capital so it gets plump and attractive and juicy and nice looking, right? And that leads us for 3 to 5 years to the moment of liquidation, which is the moment when that value is pulled out of the company, thus leaving a dysfunctional carcass of a company left over. So, and the other problem also is that with anything that is hyper growing, right? Most of the time, it's just we're doing this for optics. We're doing this so the company can look successful. But the problem with hiring people is that people are expensive. In fact, people usually are the #1 cost of the vast majority of companies. So when you hire that quickly, trying to actually have customer revenue keep up with this is very, very difficult, if not impossible. Which basically means that these hyper-growth companies almost always are very deeply in the red. And then you wind up basically having these, cash bleeding things, that are on the market. And if they are cash bleeding pre-IPO, then chances are they're still going to be cash bleeding after the IPO because nothing in the business fundamentals has changed. But what we're doing is we're hyping these up, we're pumping it up, big in the news, and in a way we're implementing a kind of pump and dump scheme onto the public markets, which leads to the question of why is this even legal? So, and the other thing also is we're told that we need to become unicorns, right? Big mystical creatures. I mean, mind you, I like, actual, they don't exist, but, I would like them if they did. But look, but the point is that, the definition of a unicorn is a company with a $1 billion valuation or higher. But unicorns have a dirty secret. And their secret is that 90% of unicorns are losing money. 90%. And the question that we don't ask often enough with these cash bleeding unicorns, we see them there in the market, we know they're losing money, we don't completely understand how they survive, and yet somehow they manage to dominate markets. The question we don't ask ourselves often enough is whose money are these cash bleeding unicorns spending? Now, if you follow the money, 65% of investment into venture capital funds, particularly in the United States, comes from pension funds. So basically, they are spending our pension money. So the other problem also is that, we also have turned the startup ecosystem into a casino, basically for investors. The statistic is that 9 out of every 10 startups fail, right? And if there's no indictment that the startup ecosystem is not working, I would say a failure rate of 9 out of 10 shows that it's pretty bad, right? And but it also means that 1 out of 10 that succeeds it can't just be a nice medium-sized company or a nice lifestyle company for the founders. No. It needs to knock it so far out of the park that it more than compensates for those 9 losses, plus that it returns, ideally at least, 3 to 5 or 3 to, or more X, returns for the limited partners of the venture capitalist. So, at that point, any hope of being able to do anything social or post-growth or, prosumer, this is all going to go out the window. And the thing is, the vast majority of founders, they just want to start something cool, you know? And on top of that, they also don't want to have a boss. They want to kind of do their own thing. And most founders just don't understand that the moment you get a venture capitalist involved, you have a boss who's now telling you what to do. You know, and venture capitalists, you know, they use the words lifestyle company, you know, as an insult. Whereas I would like to say, like, I am perfectly happy with my lifestyle company, you know, because it gives me, you know, the lifestyle that I want to have, including being able to come here and speak to you all. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, and in fact, I can also give all the staff working for Radically Open Security the kind of lifestyle that they want to have too. There's nothing wrong with that, you know? And on top of that, you know, it's the financial extraction from companies, you know, this embeds the growth imperative into startups. You know, it's precisely those returns that the venture capitalists want, you know, that are the reason why, you know, we're supposed to, you know, continue growing. Occasionally I'm asked by a journalist, you know, where do you see Radically Open Security in 10 years from now? And my honest answer is, I don't care. Because honestly, really, you know, if we grow or if we get smaller, I mean, that's up to the market, you know? What I do care very deeply about is that my ecosystem is happy. So I care very much that my staff is happy. I care that my customers are happy. I care that society is happy with us. You know, but if, you know, we grow or if we get smaller, I mean, that ultimately is, you know, I'm not going to say out of my hands, but it's just, you know, it sort of is what it is. Ironically enough, I think actually that focusing on growth will probably, in the end, probably prevent you even from growing. Because if you start, you know, cutting corners, you know, just for the sake of growth and trampling on people for the sake of growth, I mean, you're also going to make your ecosystem less happy. And in that sense, I mean, I think that growth anyway is sort of an organic byproduct of having a happy ecosystem. So in that sense, but I also think to a certain extent, growth in and of itself is missing the point. Because, you know, we talk about things like post-growth and degrowth, but I think that those terms are a little bit misleading. Because I don't think so much that it's necessarily about whether we grow or whether we degrow, you know, or whether we maintain a steady state, but I think rather the real point is the financial extraction that's underlying it. You know, because it's the financial extraction that embeds the incentives into business. The financial extraction is the reason why companies choose to externalize their costs onto society and onto the planet. If those financial incentives were not there, then companies would not do this anywhere near as often. So in that sense, I'm a very firm believer in systems thinking. And systems thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with the wonderful book Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows, who's also, of course, one of the co-authors of the original Limits to Growth paper from the Club of Rome and MIT. But you know, she speaks a lot about leverage points. And you can also think about, you know, in this sense, business and finance almost as being kind of a big connected graph. You know, as I would say as a computer scientist, it's a kind of state machine, right? And in your state machine, what you've got is you've got a number of different paths through the system. You've also got a number of different nodes where these different routes come together, and you're probably going to have some weights, you know, on these you know, in these junctions, you know, in the graph. And the weights are basically going to determine which route, you know, through the system the things are going to go. So we tend to pay attention to outcomes. You know, and if you consider, for example, the holy trilogy of ESG, right? You know, environmental, social, governance. We spend so much time on the social and on the governance on the social and on the environmental pieces, particularly on the environmental. Now, because of climate anxiety, of course, but also, the E is particularly popular because we know how to measure it, right? I mean, we can sort of quantify it. We understand things, we can measure things like carbon emissions. So we feel like we've kind of gotten a handle on it. The S is a bit fuzzier, but it's still popular. I mean, we intuitively know that, poverty and racism, is bad. But how do you measure racism? So it's a little harder to deal with, but it's still popular. The G, governance, is the orphan child. It's the dust that's swept under the rug. It's not popular at all. I mean, the best that we seem to be able to do with the G, governance, is, gee, I wonder if we can put some more women on board. And look, I'm not against board diversity, really I'm not. But truthfully, can we not come up with something a little bit more meaningful when looking at the governance part of companies? For example, looking at things like executive compensation and bonuses, and in general, the amount of financial extraction that's happening out of the company. See, because the problem is that the E and the S, the environmental and social pieces, are the symptoms. The G, the governance, is the root cause. So if you can, kind of clean up the governance, then you kind of get the environmental and the social pieces for free. In other words, in the Netherlands, we've got a really brilliant phrase for this. In Dutch, dweilen met de kraan open. In English, basically mopping with the faucet open. So we're sitting here mopping up the E and the S, while the G, the governance piece, is the faucet. And we need to turn off that darn faucet. So, but the G isn't so popular, in part because it is the hardest piece to greenwash with. It's going to sound very cynical, but we can basically create, our things with our, environmental and social metrics, and yet still we are extracting financially on a governance level and embedding all these perverse incentives into our companies. And this part, this financial extraction, this is the greenwashing. If we want to eliminate, the greenwashing basically from business, from social enterprise, and also from ESG investing, it really is as simple as eliminating the financial extraction. But, that piece of sort of, okay, sounds good, but how do I do it? It's not the easiest thing. In fact, even lawyers are not altogether sure, how to build financially non-extractive companies. It's a work in progress. So there are several parts of the social enterprise ecosystem that are focusing on governance structures. Of course, you have things like co-ops, you have steward ownership. You could also, create your company as a foundation. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do things. Now, co-ops are great, because they are basically distributing the voting rights and the profit rights basically amongst stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I mean usually either the customers or the employees of the company. There's only one problem though, and the problem here is that you're also distributing the profit rights amongst that group of stakeholders, which means that they can still collectively decide to extract. And I think this is how co-ops sometimes get mission drift. See, there's a little improvement on it that you can make. It's called the steward-owned co-op. And almost nobody talks about this, but I think it's the most awesome structure. Because what you're then doing with steward-owned co-ops is you are distributing the voting rights amongst the stakeholders, but then you are taking the profit rights and you're putting them in a foundation. that's basically hanging above the whole thing. Then you can also add some golden shares to prevent the whole thing from being sold. And this really maintains the governance benefits of a co-op in distributing the voting rights and the governance, while at the same time ensuring that no one can extract from the whole thing. Now, when I talk about financial extraction, I'm talking about anything in excess of middle-class salaries and a pension. Sorry. So I don't believe that paying salaries is extraction. You know, I also don't believe that things like paying taxes is extraction. In fact, I think we should be paying taxes. I think that's part of our social duty as businesses to do this, to give back to the society we're part of. But with steward ownership, the other thing also is you have the canonical definition of steward ownership as provided by the Purpose Foundation, which is basically separating profit rights from voting rights. And frequently how they will implement this is as a foundation-owned company. You know, and sometimes, sorry, I have a bit of a cold. And sometimes we will also add golden shares, and a golden share is basically a kind of veto vote that can prevent somebody from performing certain operations on the company. And this could be something like selling the company. It could also be something like changing the mission and the statutes, you know, of the foundation or of the company itself, right? Now, the golden share, you know, the golden shares are necessary, because otherwise you wind up getting a situation like we had with OpenAI. Because OpenAI basically was a foundation-owned company, but of course, just being foundation-owned was not enough because it did not lock down sale of the equity, which was what enabled, in the end, Sam Altman to be able to sell, you know, shares for what was it, like 10 billion, you know, to Microsoft, thus effectively turning OpenAI into a commercial company. So these golden shares are really an essential part of it. But I think with post-growth entrepreneurship, with the sort of stream of social enterprise that I'm teaching, I think we need to go a little bit further than separating profit rights from voting rights. I think actually what we need to do is, you know, with the voting rights, great, you know, but I think we actually need to lock up the profit rights. And in fact, in a way, we shouldn't have them at all. You just put them in the foundation, lock them in there with asset locks and with a golden share. Just take the whole profit motive out of the equation as it is. And my hypothesis is that if you eliminate the financial extraction from a company, if you get rid of the profit motive, then the only reason for being that is left for that company to exist is positive impact. That's it. I mean, other than that, I mean, what's the point? So, you know, and I think that this is really the crux of it all. The financial extraction and really laser focusing on how to get it out of business and out of finance. So, you know, if you ask how to do it, you know, for founders, I think the easiest way to do it if you're starting a company is to bootstrap. You know, if you have the kind of company that you can bootstrap, like a services company, just forget about the investors. You know, just try and launch your company via, you know, initial revenue from customers. But of course, there is this idea out there that you need venture capital to start your company. It's a myth. And it's a myth that needs to be busted. You know, because the Silicon Valley ecosystem is what, like 40 years old? And like, how did we start companies before VCs existed? Maybe launching customers, you know? Maybe some people had a bank loan. Maybe there were a few family, friends, and fools, but there certainly was not SoftBank dropping 100 million on you. That just did not happen back in those days. So, you know, we need to go back to the basics, you know, with business. But of course, if you go to an incubator these days as a founder, and then you say, well, can I please get some help bootstrapping my company? It's not that they're going to laugh you away. But it is that they are going to look at you extremely confused, and then they're going to be like, well, but why would you want to do that? You know? But of course, you know, they don't think about it this way either, because also with startup incubators, you also have to consider how are they earning their money. I can tell you a story. So I work sometimes, again, with the Amsterdam Center for Entrepreneurship, which was the same incubator that incubated Radically Open Security, my company. And they, you know, occasionally I give lectures to the founders about post-growth entrepreneurship, you know, sort of new forms of social enterprise. I went on a separate occasion to a commercial incubator, which will not be named. And I said, you know, I would also love to, you know, teach your founders about post-growth entrepreneurship. I'm not going to charge you a cent for it. I'm happy to do it completely for free, but I would love to teach your founders about new forms of social enterprise. Now, the incubator, they thought about it, and they said, well, you know, our investors are investment banks like Merrill Lynch, so I don't think they're going to like what you have to say. So I apologize, but I have to politely decline your offer. Now let's stop and think about this. A commercial incubator does not want to accept an offer of a free lecture about new forms of social enterprise because it comes into conflict with their own business model.
Ms. Rieback, can we wrap up
Yeah.
real quick because
we
we're
can.
on time.
Anyway, so, but not enough people talk about this, you know, and we complain about the system, right? You know, we know the system is the problem, but then when you ask people, what is the system, right? Most people cannot describe it to you. So really where I would like to finish this, this talk up is just in getting you to understand that the devil's in the details and how business and finance actually work matters. You know, and if we really want to change the system, then we need to understand the different pieces. We need to understand how they fit together. We need to understand how they move and interact. And just like a good computer hacker, we need to understand where we can wedge the ice pick to get the system to behave differently in ways that maybe it wasn't intended. And this is why corporate governance, even though it sounds boring, is so incredibly sexy. You know, also for activists, because if you really want to change this stuff, we need the tools of capitalism to fight neoliberalism, that extractive layer of financialization that is on top of things. It doesn't need to be there. And I'll leave you with the final thought that business is the most effective form of activism. Business can be a mixed media for art. Business can be a vehicle for your spirituality. And business can be a means for creative expression. So I hope that all of you in this room will be inspired as activists to take business and add it to our toolkit, because if we really want to change how things are today, this is the absolute best way that we can go about it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Rieback. Unfortunately, I won't be able to take any questions because we're out of time. We have a coffee break now until 3:20 p.m. After the break, we will continue with Dr. Özel Smith's synthesis and conclusion in Cinema Room A. Please make sure you don't have anything left in the main hall because it will be closed. Thank you all again for being here today, and we may leave for the break.